Hello and welcome to Edie Extra, the new home for all of Edie's special audio features, building on our long-running Sustainability Uncovered podcast with one-on-one interviews, site visits, analysis, panels and more.
Hello and welcome along to the Edie Extra podcast channel from Edie, the place for special audio features about the hottest topics and environmental sustainability. You're listening to the voice of Sidhi Mittal, Edie senior reporter. This episode is being recorded live at London St Pancras station. I'm here to check out a new peatland-inspired installation called the Composer's Cabin. The installation has been moved to the station after having won an award at the RHS Chelsea Flower Show. It is an open-roof cabin with a magnificent piano placed in the center of it. In the corners, you've got plenty of potted plants and a whole section dedicated to different samples of peatlands, as well as a pair of headphones where you can listen to the sounds of birds from where the peatlands have been sourced. Joining me to tell the cabin's story today is Sam Sage, Sustainability and Environmental Manager at London St Pancras Highspeed. Thank you for joining us, Sam. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. What was the thinking behind bringing the Composer's Cabin from Chelsea Flower Show into St Pancras?
So we've actually had a connection with peatlands since 2021 when we launched a campaign called Project Peatlands in the station. And that was primarily an awareness campaign about the importance of peatland ecosystems. We also purchased what's called pending issuance units. So we essentially part-funded the restoration of peatland ecosystems in the Scottish borders. So we've had a connection with peatlands for quite a while now, and it's really nice to continue that message with the Composer's Cabin, which, as you've just mentioned, is all about the importance of peatland ecosystems and bringing those plants into the station. And Chelsea actually reaches quite a specific niche of audience, so it's nice to give the station passengers and users the opportunity to see an award-winning garden that was featured at Chelsea during their everyday sort of commute.
And what do you hope travellers take away from this installation after having spent time here?
So the conversation around peatlands has been rumbling on for quite a while now. We've been promised legislation to ban the sale of peat-based products, but that's yet to be seen. So really, as with a lot of environmental issues, it's down to the consumer to make responsible choices and collective action not to buy peat-based products. So I hope that passengers and anyone coming into this cabin understands a bit more about peatlands and a bit more about why we need to protect them and what to do to help protect them. So buy peat-free compost, peat-free plants, and just raise awareness about the importance of these ecosystems.
Yeah, definitely. The location of the cabin also helps shed light at how nature can be better integrated into urban infrastructure. We had this heat wave a couple of weeks ago. What are the biggest climate risks you think the London infrastructure, especially train stations, are facing?
I think there are two really big ones, and you've mentioned one there, is extreme heat. Rail in this country doesn't cope well with heat. A lot of it's Victorian infrastructure that wasn't designed for not necessarily the level of heat, but the difference between our hottest days and our coolest days. That's creating a real problem in this country and around the world, in fact, for most infrastructure, but rail specifically. We're quite lucky in the fact that HS1 was only completed less than 30 years ago, so we are actually relatively resilient. We're not immune. I think one of the biggest risks for us is interdependent risks. So although our infrastructure is relatively resilient, we are also reliant on other infrastructure, so utilities being the biggest one. And if that fails, then obviously there's a knock-on impact to us as a business and to our passengers as well.
Where do you see nature-based solutions playing a role in that conversation?
I think nature-based solutions are really important. They don't necessarily eliminate the risks, but they reduce the impact of those extreme weather events. And I think they can work quite well with hard engineering solutions as well. So I'll give an example. We have a series of balancing ponds across our structure, and they essentially store water to manage that water flow in and around the tracks, so we don't have flooding anywhere near the tracks. And they've actually become wildlife havens since construction of the project of HS1, and the nature in and around those ponds has actually stopped runoff onto the tracks, has slowed it down. So that's a really good example of where hard engineering is working with nature to increase flood resilience for us, which is the other big issue for rail infrastructure in this country.
Featuring the cabin, I think, is a fantastic example of how public spaces can play their part in climate education and awareness. Just on that, do you think there's a bigger role for public spaces in getting rid of some of the climate misinformation that exists right now? And how should other institutions or organizations go about it?
Yeah, so I think we were quite careful with the original Project Peatlands campaign and this campaign as well to make sure that it had genuine impact and it was credible, and the message we were telling was a clear message and was a credible environmental story. And I think we have millions of passengers travelling through the station every year, so we have such a great platform to raise awareness about environmental issues, which is how the original campaign came about. I studied peatland ecosystems at university and kind of understood the need to raise awareness about their importance, especially as a climate mitigation measure. So I think using stations and high footfall areas in the public domain can be really powerful, but the message has got to be credible. We want to avoid greenwashing at all costs, as I'm sure you agree, and there's got to be a message behind it rather than just a kind of PR moment.
I agree, and especially an installation like this when nature is not accessible to a large part of the population, so you get a glimpse of it going about your daily day. When it comes to adaptation as well, there's growing focus on nature playing its part. So how do you see green spaces helping cities cope with heat waves and just climate changing in general?
So I think that there are many benefits of green spaces. There's clearly the mental health benefit. There's numerous studies that link green spaces and nature with positive mental health outcomes. But beyond that, they are another great example of a nature-based solution. Tree-lined streets are significantly cooler than those without trees. There's a real issue in London with it becoming a real heat island, and green spaces can really help reduce that. So if you picture a street with all that concrete and brick that just heats up throughout the day and at night stays warm, if it's a green space, that heat just dissipates. So I think they play an important role for numerous reasons.
Where do you think the rail industry is right now in terms of adaptation, and what's really needed to get the ball across?
That's a good question. I think the rail industry has the right intentions and is really investing in the understanding of how these risks could materialise in future years. I mentioned earlier about interdependent risks, and last year I attended a Transport for London workshop where we looked at interdependent risks within the transport system and the utility system within London. And I found that really interesting because we essentially mapped all these risks on a big board, and the number of interdependent risks, if one thing goes wrong with one utility, the knock-on effect that could have on another rail system, and that those risks just cascade, and it just shows how delicate the system can be and how dependent we are on many other companies and organisations and systems. So I think that TfL example is a really good example of where companies are investing in their understanding of climate risks rather than just jumping straight into investment, unfounded investment. I think that base level of knowledge is really important, and it's something that we're doing at London St Pancras Highspeed as well. We've had several climate change risk assessments completed, and we're now developing adaptation action plans based on the back of those risk assessments. So it's about understanding the risks and then developing mitigation measures off the back of that.
And looking ahead, what do you think climate resilient infrastructure in terms of the transport sector look like?
I think there's a mix between hard engineering solutions and nature-based solutions. In certain areas of the country where hard engineering is inevitable, down in Dawlish with the collapsing seawall, the rail goes very close to the sea there, and they've had some real issues with erosion and collapse. And so there's obviously going to be hard engineering solutions needed across the country, but I think nature-based solutions really do have a role, and I know I keep talking about it, but I think it's just so important to recognise the power of nature. And also on a cost front, some of these solutions are relatively cheap in comparison to large concrete structures that are over-engineered for what's essentially an effort to cool down a piece of rail. Can shading help that? A bit difficult on a high-speed railway. We don't want vegetation too near to the tracks for obvious reasons. But there are other solutions out there which we are exploring.
Being here at the cabin, it is quite inspiring. This piano and then the music in the background. What gives you optimism or inspires you when it comes to the relationship between nature, infrastructure, and climate adaptation?
I think there's a lot of interest in it, and it's certainly something that I found working for London St Pancras Highspeed is the senior team are really engaged in the topic and really understand it, and I think that's something that's come about over the last few years of people are starting to understand more about the importance of nature. We've got new reporting standards such as TNFD, Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, and nature-based solutions are becoming more and more researched and understood. I attend various industry working groups, and I think that's a really big topic of conversation at the moment. And obviously installations like this as well, it took a lot of fair play to our marketing team and our PR team for making this happen. It's something that everyone can get on board with. So I think there is optimism for the future. I think we just need to keep up the momentum on things like this.
Well, there you have it, the story of the composer's cabin in one podcast episode. Sam, thank you so much for taking the time to show me around and to come on the Edie Extra podcast. For everyone listening, I hope this has given a flavor of the cabin and some inspiration for your own nature and climate storytelling. The cabin will be on display until the 21st of June if you're planning to check it out. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to our Sustainability Uncovered channel wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, and YouTube. For today's episode, it's a goodbye from Sam.
Goodbye.
And a goodbye from me. Goodbye.